Greetings all, I'm Jasmine Haynes here with the Episcopal leader of the Mississippi Conference, Bishop James E. Swanson Sr. How are you doing today, Bishop Swanson?
I'm doing really well today. God's been blessing me.
Amen, amen. Bishop Swanson, we're living in some pretty interesting times right now, and they only have become more interesting over the last year with the coronavirus pandemic impacting the whole world right now. The future, as we know, is always uncertain. We can't see the future, but the virus has given us clear vision on how uncertain every day is, and then how little control that we have over our everyday lives. And it's hard to make decisions and plan because, according to the plan, you shouldn't be here talking with me today. You are supposed to be retired in 2020. So talk about your journey from that original plan to several months into the pandemic.
Wow, I'm glad you asked, Jasmine. It's kind of ironic when I think about it because I actually began my tenure in 2012 as the resident bishop of the Mississippi Conference, of our conference, really, one day early. In fact, I'm not even sure if it was August 30th or August 31st. I can't remember. But I entered this quadrennial cycle thinking that this would, and I actually thought about it, this would really be my last as an active elder, a clergy person, and as an active bishop. But none of us knew at that time, as we began 2020, that what challenges we would face because of COVID-19 and all of the things that fell out because of that virus. Delphine and I were slowly anticipating retirement, so we began to move some of our clothing and some small items from our Episcopal residence here in Jackson to our home, retirement home in Ackworth, Georgia. And every time we went home, we would take some things there. But in March of 2020, reality set into the United States and also into the United Methodist Church. And we really began to understand that this virus was not just here for a season. And so consequently, the church then decided to cancel plans around General Conference 2020 and subsequently to not really cancel, but really postpone 2020 General Conference and then postpone Jurisdictional Conference 2020. Four other bishops and I were to retire at the 2020 Jurisdictional Conference, which meant then not having a jurisdictional conference meant that we could not retire at that jurisdictional conference. So we needed to be told by our SCJ Committee on Episcopacy that we needed to remain in place until we could work our way through the discipline to find out what would be the proper way for us to honor the discipline and retire. So that's kind of how it's been going.
And for those who aren't aware, the discipline that Bishop Swanson is referring to is the formal name is the Book of Discipline. And it's the book that outlines the law, the doctrine, the administration, and the organizational work and procedures of the United Methodist Church. So that is what the Book of Discipline is. So now Bishop Swanson, like the rest of the world at that time, everyone is basically having to wait and see what's next. So after more time and deliberation of the situation, Bishop Swanson, what was proposed?
Well, what happened was we began to search. When I say we, the Council of Bishops and the College of Bishops began to deliberate, particularly with our General Counsel, William Wardell, to find out what would the Book of Discipline allow for a bishop as far as interim retirement, since we could not retire at a jurisdictional conference, which bishops were supposed to do. What we found out that there was one passage that allowed us in the Book of Discipline to retire under the rubric of what we call voluntary retirement. The problem with explaining that is that many people think when they hear voluntary retirement, they think of elders in the United Methodist Church, but it's not the same for bishops. So there were two pieces in that voluntary retirement. One was called medical retirement, and the second one was vocational retirement. Medical retirement and vocational retirement are the two items that would allow us to retire ad interim. That's what we call it. That was between jurisdictional conferences.
Okay. So just to be clear, the medical retirement would be a retirement because of health reasons. And then the vocational retirement would be due to an availability and opportunity for employment, correct?
Exactly right. In fact, I later on clarified that with Bill Wardell to be clear that vocational retirement meant going to a gainful employment of a new job. And that's what I was told. So in order for me to keep the book of discipline and the spirit of it, I needed to seek either to find vocational place to go. I was in good health. In fact, it just happened around that time I had a physical, and then my doctor told me I was in better shape than some persons in their early 50s. I was in real good shape. So
That's good news.
yeah, yeah. So the medical retirement was not open to me, and the vocational retirement was not open because I did not have any kind of job offer at that time. So that's kind of where we were in trying, and the reason the medical retirement and the vocational retirement, though it's listed under the rubric of voluntary retirement, a lot of people think that it's the same as the retirement for elders, but it's not. Bishops, that's the only two ways you can do it is for health reasons, and the other one is taking another job.
How was that further complicated?
Well, what really the complexity of it was the fact that a bishop must retire at a regular session of the jurisdictional conference that follows a general conference, and so we realized then that other than the medical or the vocational, then you had to have a general conference, and then you'd have to have a jurisdictional conference. Or with the postponement of general conference and jurisdictional conference, that was not open to us. So what the Council of Bishops did was to look at some other things that needed to be done, mainly some administrative things that would allow us to continue to function in between the general conferences. And so we put forth a proposal that was voted on and approved by the Council of Bishops to have a virtual general conference, with the plan then to follow that up with a jurisdictional conference. And that virtual conference was called for May 8th of 2021, this year. And then there were plans put in place to then have a jurisdictional conference in July of 2021. Well, I don't know if you're aware, but recently in the last Council of Bishops meeting in March, we decided to revisit that, and we voted not to have the virtual general conference, which only the bishops can call anyway. Nobody else can do that but the bishops. And so the Council of Bishops decided to rescind that and not to have the virtual general conference for 2020. In other words, a second postponement. So we were not. So then we began to say, well, what can we do in order for bishops to retire? So I started looking at that. As a result of it, there were only 3 options left open for me to retire.
Okay.
One was I could just simply wait until we had a jurisdictional conference and continue to serve as the resident bishop of Mississippi. And so that was one option, wait until we can have a jurisdictional conference and then retire. Okay. The second one was, I could do what we talked about, and that is to wait till I got sick, have a medical retirement, or maybe a job offer that I would want, and take vocational retirement. Those were the first 2. The third one was that I could look at the fact that I'm going to turn 72 in February of 2022, that's mandatory retirement. However, even with mandatory retirement, you're supposed to do that as you approach that mandatory retirement before the change of quadrennium. But since the quadrennium has changed and I'm still in place, I could say in all good conscience, I'm 72, thus I can retire. So that meant that in the middle of the quadrennium, I could still go ahead on in my own estimation of it and retire. So I decided in many ways to look at that as a third option, and that is because I'll be turning 72 in February of 2022, that I would seek mandatory retirement, and then I would feel good about fulfilling the requirements of the Booker District. So those are my three options.
Okay. So now you have this list of three options. And to be honest with you, Bishop Swanson, as I'm sure some have probably personally approached you, there have been questions from all over the conference about your decision on the end of your time here serving as the resident bishop in the Mississippi Conference. So inquiring minds want to know, which one of those three options have you decided on?
Well, as you said, one of the things too that I did not say here is the fact that by and large, once that general conference, the May 8th general conference was postponed, then the word came to us that we would be allowed and to make that decision for ourselves finally. It's your call, it's your decision. And so I met with Delphine, my wife, and the rest of the family, and we call it executive session. We talk about daddy.
So Methodist.
Yeah. and what will we do about daddy, who was supposed to retire in 2020 in August of 2020 and do what he needed to do as dad and granddad and all those other things. And so I laid those three options before them and said, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you all think? And we prayed about it, and we decided together that the third option would be the best for us, and that we would look at February of 2022. But then when I really began to look at February of 2022, I realized that we would be in the middle of our appointment cycle, and I would be walking away from the appointment cabinet at that time, which to me, I thought would not be right, especially with many of my clergy concerned about where will I go, where will I serve, and not wanting maybe a new bishop or someone else to come in and preside over that. And so what I'm going to propose to the SCJ Committee on Episcopacy is that I will be allowed to stay until June. In other words, to stay until the end of our annual conference session of 2022 and then retire, which would mean I would have gotten us through that cycle. And then I could retire at the end of the annual conference session, which would mean that we would have finished out the what we call the fiscal year of annual conference of 21-22. And then the Episcopacy Committee, the not the COE, could think about interim options, but basically that's really kind of up to the Council of Bishops if I retire as to how they will cover Mississippi until, if we go ahead on and have now what is the regularly scheduled general conference and jurisdictional conference, the general conference being scheduled for the end of August and the 1st of September of 22. And then the jurisdictional conference being scheduled for November of 22. Then by that time, that means we would have a sitting bishop probably in place by January 1, 2023 for Mississippi. That would just be that 6 months or so of an interim period of a bishop coming, either a retired bishop or someone else who would just take over for those 6 months. And so that's kind of where the family and I came down, and I agreed with them, and then I added that caveat, and they said, "Okay, we'll let you stay till June because that does make sense for the conference to get through those appointment cycle." So that's where we are.
Well, you say a regularly called um, session, but as we know, in these last 14 months or so, there's nothing regular about anything. So even with your option, I just want to be clear and reiterate, Bishop Swanson, that this is what you propose, but it will have to go to another step to be approved. This is what you're.
Well, it
Am
could
I
and it
clear
could
on
not.
that?
Well, they said it was my choice.
Okay.
So, and the only reason that might change could be that it might be earlier. And the only reason I'm saying it could be earlier, and that is that if someone pushes or somebody finds that we can have a jurisdictional conference before um, the 2022, then I could retire. Okay. Right now, I think there are still people trying to make that happen. To be frankly honest with you, and but I'm still looking at, in my heart of hearts, June of 22 would work out extremely well for me and for my family. Um, but if the church discerns, and when I say the church, the jurisdiction discerns that somehow they want to have a jurisdictional conference this summer or whenever, I won't fight that. I don't. That's just not my nature, and so I will go home earlier. But I do not have any plans to stay past June of 22. I want everybody to know that because that works out well for me and for my family and for our plans. So you can pretty much stick a pin in it that the longest tenure I will have will be June of 22 at the end of annual conference. When I hit the gavel and say "Signy die" at annual conference, yeah, peace out,
You're
mic
out.
drop. Yeah, I'm gone. And I hope that we will. I have so many connections still in Mississippi. I have reestablished relationships with my mother's family that I did not have before I came to Mississippi, and I want to maintain those relationships. And hope whoever follows me won't be intimidated by my presence in Mississippi, and I can still come back and visit. Um, it's a halfway place between my retirement home and my children and grandchildren who live in Houston, so we can still meet down on the coast and swim and enjoy each other in the surf down that way. I love Mississippi. I never knew I would fall in love with this place like I have, and I just do. And so I hope folk will allow me the luxury of maintaining those friendships and knowing and trusting that I will not interfere because I love Mississippi and I want Mississippi to be whole. And that's, but I do want to be able to come back and see my people that I got to know that I did not know, and I want to be able to use it as a rest stop, as a meeting ground from Atlanta to Houston, so that my kids can get to know their family as well. So and just that's the best way to do it for me, and I hope people will agree to that and know that and not bug me about being bishop, bug me about being friend, but not bishop. Yeah.
Well, Mississippi loves you too, Bishop Swanson. I'm just, for the record, I'm saying to you, the Mississippi Conference. So to be clear, Bishop Swanson, you have decided to continue as resident bishop of the Mississippi Conference until immediately after the 2022 session of the annual conference, correct?
That's correct. And you do know that the theme of the 2022, 2021, and I hope for 2022 will continue with the mission continues. That's our theme. And I hope people understand that that's what I'm hoping, that even when I retire, that people will say that was just another person God sent to help us to do what we're called to do, and that's to continue the mission that Jesus Christ gave us, and that people will continue to do that. And that's been my hope, my dream, and my aspiration throughout now 40 plus years of active ministry. really 45. And I'm open and praying that that will be my theme into my new ministry that God is calling me to in retirement. And so I'm excited about that. Uh, yeah, and looking forward to what the future holds for me, and also for what the future holds for the Mississippi Annual Conference, well, the people who I love so much.
Well, Bishop Swanson, I know there must have been a lot of prayer and reflection that went into this decision, as you have already mentioned with y'all's executive session. And we thank you and Miss Delphine and your family, because it is ministry is a family thing, and such a great sacrifice, a big sacrifice on a family. So thank you all for deciding to continue to lead the Mississippi Conference in such uncertain times like these, because you could have made another choice. I have talked to several people who have retired and who said, you got to know when to fold them and know when to hold them, and you want to live, you want this. I did what I could to serve my community in whatever way that was, and you want to enjoy, your grandkids and everything while your quality of life is high. So we appreciate that sacrifice and in putting the Mississippi Conference as a priority. Thank you and your family so much. So is there anything else you want to tell the Mississippi Conference, Bishop Swanson, before we go?
No, I think I've said it all, man. I love you, and keep loving Jesus. Keep loving Jesus, and no matter what comes, know I'll be praying for you, and that God promised us through the Christ, He'll never leave us, and He'll never forsake us. He's going to be with us in the midst of all the uncertainty that's out there about the church. And He will do it. God assures His word. And that's one reason I don't mind. I'm really not, though, that the sadness is about relationship. It is not about the job. Not at all. It's not about losing power, none of that kind of stuff. It's about the relationships that God has allowed me to have the joy of establishing. And I'm going to miss some people who have become very close to me, and some of you that I never got to know, but you sent me cards and letters and you prayed for me and my family. And you've been a lot. I just want to say one last thing too, though many of you, please make sure when you get a chance, drop Miss Swanson a note, because a lot of folk don't know it. But Delphine has always been a thoroughly committed Christian. I married her. I didn't convert her. She was already a Christian when she said, "I do," and a deeply devout third, fourth generation Methodist. And she loves the United Methodist Church with all her heart. So, and that's why she was able to help me to make this decision. So don't forget her, though you may not have gotten a chance to know her because of just the circumstances, particularly this last quadrennium. But just know a lot of things that I've been able to do, it's been because of her and her support and knowing she was there for me. So on behalf of Delphine and Karen and James Jr., Shondell Carlton, Janae, Joshua, and I'm not going to name them 19 grandchildren. Thank y'all so much for being home for me.
Bishop Swanson, thank you for your time today and your candor with your decision-making process. I would encourage everyone who's watching, if you want to stay abreast of what's going on in the Mississippi Conference, with our news, make sure that you visit our website at www.mississippi, spelled out, -umc.org. Also, follow our social media and subscribe to our e-newsletter. And all this information is going to be in the comment section below, so you can check that on this link. Thanks for watching today, and stay tuned because there will be a forthcoming announcement from Bishop Swanson about some conference teams and their role in looking at how what may or may not happen at the next General Conference will impact the future of the Mississippi Conference. And I mean we, Bishop Swanson and I, will see you next time.
Everybody, love you.